You need to use the bathroom in the back. The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin noise, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. This one's for first-class passengers. 9-year-old Nova Caldwell looked up, confused. She glanced at her first-class boarding pass, then at her mother. My daughter is a first-class passenger, Imani Caldwell stated firmly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. She will use the first-class restroom. But this confrontation was only the beginning. Minutes later, when the same flight attendant noticed the luggage tag on Nova's backpack, her face drained of color. Dorsey? Is that your last name? She asked, her voice suddenly small, uncertain. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The flight attendant, Shannon, according to her name tag, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. What Shannon didn't realize was that this little girl's last name would soon make her question everything she thought she knew about her job. This Thanksgiving flight from Phoenix to New York should have been a celebration. Nova's first time experiencing first class, a special birthday gift from her mother. Instead, it became a battleground where a black child had to defend her right to occupy space she had rightfully paid for. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently because they didn't look like they belonged? This story exposes how racism operates in everyday spaces. Sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant, but always damaging. The confrontation on that flight didn't just end with an uncomfortable moment. It sparked a movement that would change airline policy across the country and force a reckoning with the industry's history of discrimination. When Imani Caldwell boarded that plane with her daughter, she carried more than just luggage. She carried the weight of countless similar experiences. The sideways glances, the questioning of credentials, the constant need to prove belonging. She had spent years studying transportation discrimination cases. She knew exactly what was happening, and she refused to let it pass. Across the aisle sat May Grant, an older black woman with a scarlet scarf and pearl earrings. She offered Nova a smile that carried decades of similar battles. Protection, invisible and essential. First time up front? May asked warmly. Nova nodded, suddenly shy. Then may your orange juice come in a glass, May said, her eyes briefly flicking toward Shannon, and may your dreams be on the house. Little did anyone know that May Grant carried her own powerful secret. One that would shift the power dynamics of the entire confrontation when the moment was right. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere, this story will resonate with you. Hit subscribe now to join our community fighting against everyday racism. Because what happened on this flight isn't just one family's story, it's a window into the battles that play out every day in airports, restaurants, stores, and offices across America. But what Shannon didn't realize was that this little girl's last name would soon make her question everything she thought she knew about her job. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport buzzed with holiday energy. Families in matching hoodies, airport announcements competing with the smell of cinnamon pretzels and jet fuel. The terminal pulsed like a living thing, heat shimmering off the tarmac visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Imani Caldwell zipped her daughter's purple carry-on and squeezed Nova's hand as they stepped into the priority lane. This moment represented a year of careful planning and saving miles that Imani had once promised herself she'd never spend on anything but emergencies. But this was the emergency she'd learned to name. Joy, claimed without apology. Nova's first time in first class, a birthday gift in a season that often swallowed birthdays whole. At 9 years old and leaning into 10 with the posture of someone older, Nova traced a finger over the embossed letters on her boarding pass. First, she whispered it like a spell. Remember, Imani said, her voice low as they approached the gate. Boarding is crowded. We move with kindness and hold our space. If someone questions you, you answer politely. You don't owe anyone your story. Have you ever saved up for something special, only to feel that nagging worry that someone might try to take that moment from you? That's the reality many black parents face when preparing their children for experiences where they might be the only ones who look like them. Nova nodded, clutching a plush armadillo from a roadside gift shop on I-10. The stuffed animal was her travel companion, a small comfort in new situations. They reached the podium. The gate agent, a woman with glossy hair and a tight-lipped smile, scanned Imani's phone, then peered down at Nova's paper pass as if it might change identities midair. Traveling together? The agent asked, her tone suggesting something wasn't quite right. Yes, Imani said simply. The agent's eyes flicked to Nova's braids, then to the small magnolia pin on her denim jacket. This is a first-class seat, sweetheart. These are the big seats. Nova looked up, startled, then to her mother. The implication hung in the air, that perhaps there had been a mistake, that perhaps this child didn't belong in first class. We're aware, Imani replied. She kept her tone warm, but a warning simmered beneath her words. She had once lowered her temperature and let injustice pass to keep a plane moving. Not today. Not with Nova next to her. A man behind them shifted impatiently. "It's Thanksgiving week," he muttered to no one and anyone. "Can we not?" The gate agent's smile brightened with performative sweetness. She stamped the passes. "Board at your convenience. Happy holidays." Imani collected the passes and moved forward, counting breaths the way you count stealth victories. Slowly, deliberately. They joined the small queue for first class, a couple in matching Huskers gear, a woman with an elite status tag dangling from her tote, a white-haired gentleman whose scarf seemed more Paris than Phoenix. Nova's shoulder brushed the velvet rope separating the first-class line from the main cabin line. "See," Imani whispered, bending low. "We belong where our ticket says we belong." This wasn't just about a comfortable seat or early boarding. For Imani, this moment represented something deeper, teaching her daughter to claim space without apology, to expect the dignity that comes with paying for a service, regardless of how others might perceive her. Before leaving home, Imani had reviewed the report on her desk, dog-eared and underscored, documenting incidents of flying while black. Men removed for a claim of body odor in Phoenix, allowed back on in humiliation. A retired black judge told to use the coach restroom while white passengers flowed freely to the first-class lavatory. A black woman denied a meal as the only one in her cabin left with an empty tray. Imani could recite Title VI without blinking, knew precisely which regulation codified non-discrimination in places receiving federal funds. As they approached the boarding gate, she had no idea that her daughter's first luxury experience was about to turn into a battle for dignity that would change airline policy forever. At the aircraft door, the lead flight attendant flashed professional cheer. "Welcome aboard." His smile seemed genuine, his welcome warm. The second flight attendant, a woman with a platinum bob and a jawline sharp enough to slice citrus, looked down at Nova and let out a sigh that wasn't quite under her breath. "Adorable," she said to the lead, eyes sliding to Nova. "Bring your child to cabin day." The lead shot her a look, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The second attendant, whose name tag read Shannon, lifted the corner of Nova's boarding pass with a manicured nail as if checking the watermark on cash. "These are the big seats," Shannon repeated, the words landing harder in the compressed air at the threshold. Imani felt heat crackling under her sternum. This was the moment where many would smile and move on, swallowing the indignity to avoid making a scene. But each time that happened, the pattern reinforced itself. "Good morning," Imani said evenly. "We're in 2C and 2D. Shannon's gaze held one heartbeat too long. Then she stepped aside with a motion that felt less like invitation and more like reluctant compliance. First class on the Airbus A321neo gleamed with the kind of sleek that photographs well. Charcoal leather, brushed aluminum, neat lines of bottled water and folded blankets like a promise. Nova slid into 2D and ran a palm over the armrest as if it were an animal to be soothed. "Does the seat recline like a lawn chair?" she asked, excitement momentarily overriding the tension. "Not fully," Imani smiled. "More like a really dignified nap." Across the aisle in 2A sat an older black woman reading a paperback with a dog-eared corner. She wore a scarlet scarf tied just so and pearl earrings that suggested stories. She glanced up, noticed Nova, and offered a smile that lingered like sunscreen in July. Protection, invisible and essential. "First time up front?" she asked, voice warm. Nova nodded, sudden shy. "Then may your orange juice come in a glass," the woman said, her eyes flicking briefly to Shannon. "And may your dreams be on the house." Have you noticed how sometimes the smallest gestures of solidarity can feel like a lifeline? That brief exchange between May and Nova created an invisible alliance in a space where Nova's belonging was being questioned. The door closed. The pushback tug groaned. As the safety demonstration began, Shannon walked the aisle, eyes scanning. She stopped at 2D and leaned in. "Sweetheart," she said to Nova, "when we take off you'll need to keep that seatbelt tight. And if you need to use the restroom just head back to the one behind the curtain. The one up here is for, well," she hooked a thumb over her shoulder, a practiced motion that didn't finish its sentence. "For passengers in first class?" Imani said. She let the word hang. Shannon's mouth tightened. "For those with access." Imani felt the woman in 2A stiffen with her. They held the same breath. "My daughter has access," Imani said calmly. "She has a first-class boarding pass. She is a passenger in first class." Shannon's eyes flicked to Nova's face, to the magnolia pin. "Just making sure we're all comfortable," she said, and for a moment her face betrayed an irritation that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with boundaries policed in whispers. This is where things start to get uncomfortable. Comment below if you've witnessed similar treatment while traveling. These moments happen every day, small acts of exclusion that send the message, you don't belong here. Takeoff turned the Earth into a giant sandbox. Phoenix peeled away, a grid of tan and turquoise pools, then desert, then cloud. Nova pressed her nose to the window. The seat belt sign chimed off. The cart arrived with drinks on white linen. For a stretch, peace. Orange juice in a real glass. Nova beamed at the physics of it all. The man in 2B, who had boarded late and taken his seat with the hasty entitlement of someone accustomed to space bending around him, ordered a scotch and soda. He winked at Shannon when she delivered it with extra lime, just as he'd requested. You're the best, he said. Shannon's professional demeanor warmed noticeably. The woman in 2A, who had introduced herself as May Grant during the drink service, caught Imani's eye and gave a subtle nod. The nod said, I see it too. You're not imagining this. But the questioning at the gate was just the beginning. What happened next during the meal service would reveal exactly how differently passengers were being treated. Chicken or pasta? The lead flight attendant asked the man in 1C. Chicken, he said. Chicken or pasta? To 1D. Pasta, please. At 2C, Imani smiled. Chicken, thank you. Shannon had appeared beside the lead like a shadow learning to speak. We're actually out of chicken, she said, expression neutral. Imani glanced over Shannon's shoulder at the cart, where a covered dish the size of a suburban casserole sat like a secret. We only loaded a certain number, Shannon said, tone crisp. It's a full flight. That's fine, Imani said. She had spent enough time in courts to recognize when the fight mattered and when the record mattered more. Pasta is great. But when the man in 2B, who had boarded late, asked for chicken, Shannon lifted the lid with a flourish and presented one as if conjuring charity. The smell rose rich and warm. Imani felt May put down her book. Must be my lucky day, the man in 2B quipped. He winked at Shannon. Perks of loyalty. Imani's fork hovered. Something small and hard slid into place inside her. She reached slowly for her phone, not to record yet, but to mark the fact of herself. She texted her sister in Detroit, it's starting. What would you do in Imani's position? Would you speak up immediately, or document the pattern of behavior first? These split-second decisions carry weight. Confront now and risk being labeled difficult, or gather evidence and risk enabling continued discrimination. Nova ate her pasta quietly, but Imani noticed her daughter's eyes tracking the interactions, absorbing the subtle differences in how passengers were treated. This was the education Imani never wanted to provide, how to recognize when rules bend for some but remain rigid for others. When Nova stood 20 minutes later and tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing discreetly toward the forward lavatory, Imani nodded. Shannon appeared like a storm breaking over flat land. Back restroom for coach, she said too loud for the space. This one's occupied. It's open, Nova said, pointing to the green light. Shannon's hand hovered near the curtain, a bouncer's gesture at a velvet rope in a city where velvet still stands in for law. Imani stood. My daughter is a first-class passenger. She will use the first-class restroom. Each word clicked like a metronome. Across the aisle, May pressed her call button. The light above her seat pinged gently, at odds with the thrum in Imani's chest. The lead attendant arrived, eyes clocking the triad. Everything all right? Mrs.? Shannon began, then caught herself. This passenger is insisting her daughter. Her daughter has a boarding pass for this cabin, May said. Is there a reason she can't use the facilities in the cabin she paid for? The lead hesitated longer than comfort allowed. Of course, he said finally. Apologies for the confusion. Shannon's jaw ticked. She stepped back. Nova slipped into the small room, shut the door with a click, and the engine noise filled the space where things unsaid live. The next part of this story reveals how one small detail changed everything. The man in 2B shifted in his seat, watching the interaction with poorly disguised interest. When the lead flight attendant moved away, he leaned slightly toward Imani. No one is trying to make trouble, he said in a low voice. It's just protocol. Protocol applied selectively isn't protocol, Imani replied quietly. It's discrimination. The man's expression hardened. He pressed his call button. When the lead arrived, the man's voice dropped to an intimate register. I don't want to make a fuss, he said, lowering his chin, but the woman across the aisle has been frankly confrontational, making the crew uncomfortable. It's a safety thing. Safety. The incantation that turns air into permission. Imani closed her eyes and counted. 1, 2, 3. She opened them to find May's hand extended across the aisle, steady as a railing at a steep stair. The lead's expression rearranged itself into concern aimed in the wrong direction. "Ma'am," he said to Imani, "we need you to keep it calm. We can involve the captain if—" "Involve him," May said lightly, pressing her call button again. "Please." The cockpit door stayed closed, of course. But minutes later, a woman in a navy blazer arrived from coach, face tight with authority. "I'm the purser," she said. "We've had a report of disruption." Imani laughed, a sound that surprised her. "The disruption," she said, "is policy enforced unevenly." She kept her voice in the low register of evidence. A first-class passenger told she couldn't use the first-class restroom. Emil denied that magically existed when a different passenger asked. A child's seat questioned at the door. The purser's lips thinned. "We can discuss this on the ground," she said. "If this continues, law enforcement will meet us at the gate at JFK." There it was, the cliff's edge. The threat that silences so many valid complaints. Nova's fingers found Imani's. The plane hummed on, indifferent. When Nova stood up to use the bathroom, no one could have predicted how a simple luggage tag was about to flip the entire power dynamic of the cabin upside down. When the door opened and Nova returned, wiping clean hands on a paper towel she'd insisted on using to avoid the high-efficiency dryer, something shifted in Shannon's face. Not contrition. Calculation? Fear. She stared at Nova's backpack as if it had spoken. "Is that your last name?" Shannon asked, voice unexpectedly small. She pointed to the luggage tag, the one Nova had gotten at the community center's summer book fair, embossed in gold. "Nova Dorsey." Nova blinked. "Yes. Dorsey," Shannon repeated, the color draining from her face. "As in?" She cut herself off. Imani watched her, surprised. "As in her father," she said carefully. "What does that mean to you?" Shannon swallowed. The cabin didn't so much quiet as lean in. A man in 3A overtly removed his noise-canceling headphones. "The Dorsey Standard," Shannon said, barely above a whisper. At training they—" She stopped. "Never mind." She pulled in a breath and pasted professionalism back on like concealer. Imani's spine straightened. "Training. Of course." Some corporate consultant had finally named a thing after the first black flight attendant at a major U.S. carrier, taught a module about dignity and neutral language and gates kept without guns. Joan Dorsey, the name that had glowed on screen when Imani had read about the early pioneers who had sued and insisted and flown anyway. Maybe the airline had branded it, turned human history into a laminated pledge at a morning briefing. "Is there a problem?" Imani asked. "No." Shannon's voice shook. "No problem. Excuse me." She moved forward, then vanished behind the service curtain. "If you've made it this far, you're one of the real ones who cares about justice. Like this video and comment where you're watching from so we can see how far this story reaches." Imani sank back. The older woman in 2A leaned across the aisle. "They make them say the name like a prayer," she murmured. "Some remember the meaning." She offered a hand. "May Grant." Imani Caldwell. May's eyes softened. "You're not imagining any of it." She angled her chin subtly toward 2B. "Watch him. He'll be helpful until he can be harmful." As if on cue, 2B lifted his call button. When the lead arrived, the man's voice dropped to an intimate register. "I don't want to make a fuss," he said, lowering his chin, "but the woman across the aisle has been, frankly, confrontational, making the crew uncomfortable. It's a safety thing." Safety. The incantation that turns air into permission. Imani closed her eyes and counted. 1, 2, 3. She opened them to find May's hand still extended, steady as a railing at a steep stair. The lead's expression rearranged itself into concern aimed in the wrong direction. "Ma'am," he said to Imani, "we need you to keep it calm. We can involve the captain if—" "Involve him," May said lightly, pressing her call button again. "Please." The cockpit door stayed closed, of course. But minutes later, a woman in a navy blazer arrived from coach, face tight with authority. "I'm the purser," she said. "We've had a report of disruption." Imani laughed, a sound that surprised her. "The disruption," she said, "is policy enforced unevenly." She kept her voice in the low register of evidence. A first-class passenger told she couldn't use the first-class restroom. Emil denied that magically existed when a different passenger asked. A child's seat questioned at the door. The purser's lips thinned. "We can discuss this on the ground," she said. "If this continues, law enforcement will meet us at the gate at JFK." There it was, the cliff's edge. Nova's fingers found Imani's. The plane hummed on, indifferent. May stood slowly so no one could mistake steadiness for threat. She reached into her tote and pulled out a worn leather case, the kind that holds documents you want to outlast you. She flipped it open and slid out a laminated ID, yellowed with time. The purser squinted. "What is this?" "American Wings, 1971, May said. "Junior flight attendant. Later supervisor. I helped write the first draft of the fairness guidelines you now call the Dorsey Standard. I retired before they remembered how to say the name out loud again." She tucked the ID away. Page 1, line 3, "A premium cabin is not a private club." Something like recognition moved through the purser's face. She pivoted to Shannon, who had reappeared, smaller than before. "Miss Pierce," the purser said. "A word." They disappeared behind the curtain. The cabin breathed again. Nova squeezed Imani's hand twice, their code for "I'm here." In the quiet, Tubi cleared his throat. "No one is trying to be racist," he said to the air, a declaration that always arrived like a match near tinder. "It's the holidays. Everyone's stressed." "Stress reveals practice," May said, settling into her seat. "Not principles." As they landed in New York, Imani expected to be met by security. Instead, what waited at the gate would lead to a confrontation that would change airline policy across the country. The rest of the flight unfolded in a strange suspended harmony, the way a choir holds a note past comfort. Shannon returned with a tray of macarons and an apology so formal it felt dictated. The lead checked on them twice, earnest or strategic. Imani couldn't tell. Nova fell asleep with her head against her mother's shoulder, the wrapped armadillo tucked in like a dog under a blanket. They descended through clouds. Jamaica Bay glinted beyond the wing. The captain's voice came over the intercom, a baritone edged with the fatigue of holiday routes. "Welcome to New York," he said. "We'll be at the gate shortly. On behalf of the crew, happy Thanksgiving." Inside Imani, the knot was not undone. It was simply given back to time. At the jet bridge, two people in Navy suits waited. Not Port Authority officers as Imani had braced for, but a man and a woman with badges on lanyards that read customer experience and compliance. The purser exited the plane with them, eyes flitting away from Imani's. "Miss Caldwell?" the woman asked. "Yes," Imani said, holding Nova's hand so their palms shared a single pulse. "We'd like to speak with you privately," the man said, "about what happened on board. But here's what most people don't realize about these situations. Privacy is where stories go to be minimized. Where incidents become misunderstandings, and systemic problems become isolated events." Imani measured them. "We can speak here," she said. "Or not at all." May stepped up beside her, scarf glowing in the harsh gate light. "I'll stay," she said. Shannon lingered 3 paces back, not dismissed and not excused, a person caught between policy and conscience. The woman from compliance drew a breath. "First," she said, "we're sorry. We've reviewed the crew log. There were discrepancies." Imani held up a hand. "This cannot be about logs," she said. "This is about patterns." She steadied her voice. "I've read the cases. Men removed for a complaint about body odor, humiliated, then let back on as if trauma can reverse itself. A retired judge told to use the coach restroom in first. Premium cabin privileges withheld until whiteness asked. You say you have a standard named after a pioneer. Then practice her name." She gestured gently to Nova. "With my daughter's very first flight up front." Shannon flinched as if hit by a small, true stone. "What do you want to happen?" Compliance asked, the question that tries to shift weight to the harmed. Imani counted, then answered. "I want accountability without theater. I want training that isn't a slide deck. I want your crew to know the history they invoke when they say Dorsey. I want my daughter to board in any city and not have her claim to space tested like counterfeit." She paused. "And I want this conversation in writing." The man nodded, looking chastened in a way that might last until dinner. "We will follow up," he said. He handed her a card. Imani took it. She turned and found Shannon's eyes. "Miss Pierce," Imani said. "Do you know who Joan Dorsey was?" Shannon's throat moved on a swallow. "The first black flight attendant at a major U.S. airline," she said softly. "She had to fight to be allowed to fly. I know the words." Imani softened because she recognized that precise struggle, to know the words and not yet have them in your hands. "My daughter carries the name," she said. "Not because she's related by blood. Because we choose our ancestors by how we honor them." Shannon's eyes glossed. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what I did. For what I thought and didn't say and didn't stop. She looked down at Nova. "Miss Dorsey. Happy Thanksgiving. Nova lifted her chin like a small lighthouse. You too. They walked up the jet bridge into the ferment of JFK, where pretzel stands and shouting reunions and bleary-eyed New Yorkers under fluorescent lights made a kind of battered, beautiful democracy. In the cab line, Nova leaned her head on Imani's coat. Mom? She asked. What's the Dorsey Standard? Imani thought of May's hands and Shannon's fear and a training module that tried to compress a woman's life into bullet points. It's a promise, she said, that people will be treated like they belong where they are. Does it work? Not yet, Imani said. But it will. This moment between mother and daughter captures the reality of progress. It's never complete, never perfect, but always possible. How many conversations like this happen every day, where parents must explain to their children that the world isn't fair yet, but that doesn't mean we stop working to make it better. Shannon's apology was just the beginning. What happened in the months that followed would transform a moment of discrimination into a movement that would affect thousands of travelers. The winter unspooled. December carried them into candlelight services and an MLK Day teach-in at the community center where Nova read from a poster board about civil rights and transportation. Buses, lunch counters, gates and jet bridges. Videos of their flight, shot by a teenager in row 3, made quiet rounds online. Imani fielded calls from a reporter in Queens, a civil rights organization in D.C., an attorney in Dallas who used the word class action and meant it. The letter from the airline arrived with a logo and a tone perfected by decades of glancing blows. There were words like regret, and values, and our commitment. There was also, after Imani's insistence, a paragraph about concrete action, a partnership with a museum to create a traveling exhibit on the history of black flight attendants and pilots, an expansion of training to include community-taught modules led by retired crew, not consultants, the reinstatement of a DI panel that had quietly been disbanded when the headlines cooled. In a footnote, Imani's favorite place to find meaning, there was a sentence about adding a child-centered component to the Dorsey Standard, celebrating first-time premium flyers regardless of age with a small pin and a welcome script that started with, "We're glad you're here." In March, at a forum held at a public library branch off Malcolm X Boulevard, they unveiled the exhibit. May stood at the podium in a red jacket that matched her scarf and read excerpts from her diary, nights on layover in Atlanta when a hotel clerk would not find her reservation until she smiled too brightly, mornings in Portland when she was assigned the galley again and again so she wouldn't be seen up front. Shannon stood in the back, hands clutched, and waited until the line dwindled to approach Imani. "I asked to be assigned to the team that rolls this out," she said. "They let me." That doesn't undo what happened." She swallowed. "But I don't want to freeze at a name ever again." Imani watched her then nodded. Redemption, she was learning, moved like a river. You could not force it to flow where it didn't want to, but you could widen the channel when it came. On Juneteenth, in the park off 135th Street where kids lined up for free snow cones and aunties sold rib tips from foil trays, Nova pinned a tiny gold magnolia to Shannon's blazer. The pin read, "We're glad you're here." A marching band from a Brooklyn middle school played a Stevie Wonder cover that made the crowd sway. May laughed until her eyes shone. "Look," Nova said, pointing to the edge of the park where a banner flapped in the wind. It read the Dorsey Standard, a traveling story of belonging. "You chose your ancestor," Imani said, touching the letter on Nova's necklace. "And she chose you back." Late that night, fireworks from Coney Island stitched red and white into the dark. A plane drifted across the pattern like a comet that someone had scheduled. Imani thought of every airport she had known, Detroit's McNamara echoing with Motown, Charlotte's white rocking chairs, SFO sunlight. She thought of terminal coffee at 5 a.m. and the way first-class lines sometimes felt like turnstiles into a country that had only rented belonging to people like her. Her phone buzzed on the picnic blanket. A message from the attorney in Dallas. The case had been filed. A suit naming patterns, not revenge, restroom policing, unequal service, pretext and punishment, the callous alchemy where comfort for one becomes suspicion for another. In the complaint was an exhibit that made Imani smile in spite of everything. Nova's first-class boarding pass, printed in bold under her name. Nova Dorsey. On the 4th of July they flew again, New York to Seattle to visit cousins who spent too much time at Pike Place Market arguing about which chowder stall ruled. At the gate, a flight attendant knelt to Nova's eye level and said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Dorsey. First time up front." Nova shook her head. "Not my first," she said, the shy gone. "But my first with you." The attendant grinned and handed her a pin. "We're glad you're here." In 2D, Nova buckled in, looked at the window, then at her mother. "Do you think," she asked, "it will always be like this?" Imani followed her gaze to the wing, the tarmac, the people moving like tiny beads of mercury. She thought of how change worked at human speed until suddenly it didn't, how laws cracked open and then minds followed in sweat and starts. She thought of the way the country forgot and remembered itself every few years, holidays like mile markers on a highway it kept repairing while driving. "No," she said finally. "I think it will be better than this." The plane lifted, and Nova's magnolia pin caught the sun, a small brilliant flare pinned over the heart, bright enough for anyone paying attention to see. This story matters because it shows how change happens. Not through grand gestures or sweeping legislation alone, but through individual moments of courage, through refusing to accept the small indignities that build into systems of exclusion. If you're not subscribed yet, what's holding you back? Join us in amplifying these crucial stories by hitting subscribe, sharing with someone who needs to hear this, and ringing that notification bell. Because the next time you board a plane and see someone being questioned about where they belong, remember Nova Dorsey and the small gold pin that now says, "We're glad you're here." Because sometimes, the most powerful changes start with a single moment of standing your ground.